The Strait of Hormuz. What is it and why are we hearing so much about it right now? Well, first off, the Strait of Hormuz is a narrow channel connecting the Persian Gulf and the Gulf of Oman, which essentially is the Persian Gulf's only access to the Indian Ocean and the rest of the shipping world. Sandwiched between Iran and Oman, the strait is only 24 miles wide at its most narrow point, and vessels going in or out are confined to two 2-mile wide shipping lanes separated by just 2 miles themselves. So why is it so important? Let's take a closer look at the countries lining the Persian Gulf: the United Arab Emirates, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Iraq, and Iran. These are all oil-rich nations who ferry significant amounts of their products through the Strait of Hormuz in order to get it to the rest of the world. In fact, 1/5 of the world's oil and liquefied natural gas, or LNG, shipments pass through the strait every year, and many countries rely on the crude that comes out of the Strait of Hormuz. China, for example, is the biggest consumer of Iranian oil, and 45% of the oil it uses annually comes via the strait. But after the US and Israel launched their joint attack on Iran in February, Iran launched a series of drone attacks and missile threats to effectively close the Strait of Hormuz to most traffic. In the first half of March, around 90 ships passed through the strait, down from roughly 100 to 135 vessels that crossed each day before the war. That's caused oil prices to soar from $65 a barrel to over $100, and markets around the world to tumble.
A single stretch of water, barely 21 miles wide at its narrowest point, holds the entire global economy hostage.
Strait of Hormuz.
Strait of Hormuz.
President Trump asked the chairman of the Joint Chiefs why they can't just immediately reopen the Strait of Hormuz.
Every morning, the world wakes up, turns on its lights, fills up its cars, and runs its factories, largely because oil continues to flow through one narrow corridor between Iran and Oman. Not a pipeline, not a highway, a strait. And right now, that strait is the most dangerous piece of water on the planet. We're talking about the Strait of Hormuz. And if you've been following the news lately, you already know that the tension building around that waterway isn't theoretical anymore. Warships are circling it. Insurance premiums for oil tankers have surged to levels that make shipping companies wince. And the actual shipping traffic through the strait has collapsed to a fraction of what it was just a year ago. The world's most important energy choke point is under siege, and the consequences are being felt everywhere, from Wall Street trading floors to grocery store shelves in the American Midwest. But here's the question that engineers, strategists, and geopolitical analysts have been asking quietly for decades, and that everyone is suddenly asking out loud. What if ships didn't have to go through the Strait of Hormuz at all? What if someone just dug around it? It sounds audacious. It sounds expensive. It might even sound a little crazy. But the idea of building a massive canal through the mountains of Oman's Musandam Peninsula, a canal that would allow supertankers to bypass the strait entirely, has been kicking around in strategic planning circles for years. And every time tensions spike in the Persian Gulf, that idea gets a fresh look. Today, we're going to give it a very serious one. Because understanding why this canal doesn't exist yet tells you something profound about how fragile the global economy really is, and why the world keeps betting everything on 21 miles of water that one bad actor can threaten on any given afternoon. Let's start with the geography, because you cannot understand the problem without understanding the map. The Persian Gulf is essentially a bathtub. It's an enclosed body of water surrounded on almost every side by land, with one exit, just one. The Strait of Hormuz, at its southeastern end, is where everything pours out into the Arabian Sea and eventually the open ocean. And the countries ringing that bathtub, Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Kuwait, Qatar, the United Arab Emirates, happen to be some of the largest oil producers on Earth. Together, the tankers leaving those nations carry roughly 20 million barrels of crude oil through the strait every single day. That's approximately 1/5 of total global oil consumption, moving through a corridor where the actual navigable shipping lanes are just 2 miles wide in each direction. 2 miles in each direction for 1/5 of the world's oil supply. If you designed that system from scratch today, no rational engineer would approve it. The concentration of risk is almost incomprehensible. But this isn't a design system. It's a geological accident that the global economy has built itself around over the past century, and now dismantling that dependency is one of the hardest problems in international energy policy. Some countries have tried. Saudi Arabia, recognizing the vulnerability decades ago, built a pipeline system that moves oil across the Arabian Peninsula to ports on the Red Sea, allowing some of its exports to bypass the strait entirely. The United Arab Emirates made a similar move, constructing a pipeline that connects its oil fields directly to the port of Fujairah, which sits outside the Strait of Hormuz on the Gulf of Oman. These are serious infrastructure investments, and they're not nothing. But even combined, these pipelines can only carry a fraction of the total oil that normally travels by tanker through Hormuz. The math simply doesn't work in their favor at scale.
Canada signing onto this pledge made with 6 other countries, which includes all the members of the G7, less the United States, but adds the Netherlands, who also signed on to this agreement. They're all pledging to help keep the Strait of Hormuz clear. Of course, this waterway is vital to world energy supply. About 20% of global oil passing through this narrow passage off the coast of Iran. It has been largely shut down since the war began, and that has pushed oil prices around the world up. Now, in this statement that Canada signed on to, the country said, "We call on Iran to cease immediately its threats, laying of mines, drone and missile attacks, and other attempts to block the strait to commercial shipping. We express our readiness to contribute to appropriate efforts to ensure safe passage through the strait." Well, what does that mean exactly? The communique doesn't really say, and how Canada and others could possibly contribute to this effort is unclear, to say the least. The government has repeatedly said it won't join the war in Iran militarily. That is, we're not going to send troops, we're not going to send airplanes, we're not going to send ships. So very likely this statement is kind of forward-looking to a period when the hot war ends and the missiles stop flying. So possibly there could be a role there for the Royal Canadian Navy in maybe escorting tankers through the strait, maybe doing some mine clearing operations.
For the bulk of the world's Persian Gulf oil exports, ships are still the only viable option, and ships have to go through the strait. Which brings us to the Musandam Peninsula, and the idea that won't die. Look at a map of the region, and your eye is immediately drawn to a strange geographic feature at the northern tip of Oman. The Musandam Peninsula juts northward into the Strait of Hormuz like a jagged, broken fist. It's rugged, dramatic, almost violently rocky terrain, and it's politically detached from the rest of Oman, separated from the Omani mainland by a stretch of UAE territory. But here's what makes it so tantalizing from an engineering standpoint. In several places along that peninsula, the distance between the Persian Gulf to the west and the Gulf of Oman to the east is surprisingly, almost tauntingly, short. We're talking about a few dozen miles of land separating 2 bodies of water. A few dozen miles between the choke point that controls global energy markets and the wide open ocean beyond it. The idea is seductive in its simplicity. Dig a canal through the peninsula. Ships leaving the Persian Gulf sail through the canal directly into the Gulf of Oman. The Strait of Hormuz becomes irrelevant. Iran loses its leverage overnight. The global economy exhales. Problem solved. Except for one thing. That peninsula is not sand. It is not flat desert. It is not amenable to the kind of large-scale dredging operations that built the Suez Canal or widened the Panama Canal. The Musandam Peninsula is part of the Hajar mountain range, one of the most geologically violent and rugged landscapes in the entire Middle East. Sharp limestone peaks erupt from the coastline. The terrain is fractured, steep, and technically brutal. Some of these mountains rise more than 2,000 meters above sea level. That's over 6,500 feet. Building a canal here wouldn't be an engineering project. It would be a geological intervention of almost mythological scale. And you can't just build a narrow ditch. Remember what's going to be sailing through this thing. The ships that carry Persian Gulf oil to the rest of the world are among the largest vessels ever constructed by human hands. Very large crude carriers, VLCCs in industry shorthand, are behemoths. Some are nearly 400 meters long. They sit deep in the water, require enormous turning radii, and need considerable clearance on either side. A canal that accommodates these ships safely would need to be deep, wide, rigorously maintained, and structurally sound enough to handle the constant transit of hundreds of these giants every week. To carve something like that through the Hajar Mountains, you wouldn't just be digging, you'd be detonating, blasting, drilling, and hauling away millions upon millions of tons of solid limestone. Entire mountain ridges would need to be fundamentally reshaped. The engineering challenge isn't merely difficult. It's in a different category from almost anything humanity has attempted at comparable scale. The Panama Canal expansion, one of the most celebrated mega-projects of the early 21st century, cost approximately $5 billion and took nearly a decade to complete. And the Panama Canal runs largely through relatively flat, manageable terrain by comparison. Estimates for a Musandam Canal have floated anywhere from the tens of billions to well over $100 billion. And those figures assume everything goes according to plan, which large infrastructure projects in mountainous terrain essentially never do. Cost overruns, geological surprises, environmental complications. All of these tend to multiply the final price tag in ways that even the most conservative initial estimates fail to anticipate. Speaking of environmental impact, the scale of what we're discussing here would be staggering. The Musandam Peninsula is home to a remarkably rich and largely pristine marine ecosystem. The fjord-like inlets along its coastline, locally called khors, are internationally recognized for their biodiversity. The coral reefs, the fish populations, the migratory patterns of marine life that depend on the specific water dynamics of the region, all of this would be fundamentally altered by blasting a navigation channel through the mountains. And then there's the limestone itself. The rock that makes up the Hajar Mountains is not inert. Cutting through it at this scale would produce dust, debris, and chemical byproducts that would need to be managed across what is already one of the world's most ecologically sensitive coastal zones. None of this is impossible, technically speaking. Humans have moved mountains before, sometimes literally. But the cost in money, time, environmental consequence, and political capital is so enormous that it pushes the project from the category of difficult infrastructure into something more like generational civilizational undertaking. And that's before we even get to the politics, because the engineering is actually the easier half of this problem. The Musandam Peninsula belongs to Oman, all of it. And while Oman is a stable, well-governed nation with a sophisticated approach to foreign policy, playing a unique role in the region as a quiet diplomatic broker between states that are otherwise deeply hostile to each other, there is currently no official plan, no government proposal, and no publicly acknowledged discussion of building a canal through its territory. Oman's development vision for Musandam focuses on high-end tourism, maritime ports, and regional infrastructure connectivity. Turning the peninsula into a global shipping corridor of this magnitude would represent a complete reorientation of national priorities, require decades of sustained political commitment, and expose the country to a level of international attention and strategic pressure that its careful, neutral foreign policy posture is specifically designed to avoid. Beyond Oman, the project would require extraordinary international cooperation from the moment a shovel hit the ground. Which countries would finance it? The Gulf states with the most to gain, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Kuwait, would presumably be the most motivated investors. But infrastructure projects of this scale, cutting through a sovereign third party's territory, require a level of political alignment and sustained multilateral commitment that is notoriously difficult to sustain over the years or decades such a project would take to complete. Regional relationships shift, governments change, priorities evolve. The history of mega infrastructure proposals in the Middle East is littered with ambitious announcements that quietly disappeared when the political winds changed. And here is the deepest irony of the whole concept, the one that tends to stop the conversation cold when serious analysts think it through. Even if all of those obstacles were somehow overcome, even if the money materialized, the politics aligned, the environmental concerns were addressed, and the mountains were carved, A canal through Musandam would not actually eliminate the vulnerability. It would relocate it. Right now, the world's energy choke point is the Strait of Hormuz. If this canal existed, the world's energy choke point would be the Musandam Canal. And a canal is, if anything, more vulnerable than a natural strait.